It's great to be here. What I plan to do is rattle through some slides talking a bit about the example of Orsted, this massive transformation that we need to make happen in energy and that is happening, and use the company as a bit of an example for that. Also, what that then looks like on the ground specifically for offshore wind, and then maybe finish up with a bit about, well, what that challenge and the enterprise challenge looks like going forward. My background here, I work in the offshore wind part of Orsted, currently as Programme Director of Hornsea One and Hornsea Two. We'll talk a little bit about those projects in a minute. They are offshore wind projects off the coast near here, and currently the two largest offshore wind projects in the world. This is a bit of information about Orsted, or Dong Energy as we used to be called. And we're going through a massive transformation of who we are and what we are. And on the left there you see how in approximately a 10-year period we have made a major change to the emissions intensity of the heat and power that we generate. At the same time, in the middle, we have grown very substantially. That's a net growth despite a massive contraction in the non-renewable part of what we do. And then on the right-hand side, at the same time, that growth is a growth from a very concentrated Northwest Europe starting point into a much more diverse spread and international business. So we're now at the point where green energy is by far the majority of what we do. It is our strategy, it's our focus, and it's our growth platform. This is something of what's been going on in offshore wind for the last, actually, nearly 30 years, starting from small roots. We've got Vindeby there, the first offshore wind farm. It was 5 megawatts, 11 turbines. We now produce that with a single, and more, with a single turbine. What we do is we develop those sites, we get the planning consents, we then commit the investment and build the asset, and then we own and operate it through the lifetime. We've been doing that in a whole sequence of projects over these years. The projects have got bigger and bigger, and the projects have changed. Up to about 10 years ago, it was very much a series of individual projects, and we would start afresh each time. And in this last 10 years, the change that we've been driving and that our supply chains have been pushing us to complete is to taking an industrialized approach. So that instead of project by project, what we're trying to do is make it a much more efficient train. It's a much more mature way of doing it. At the same time, the nature of what we're doing has changed. It was, approximately 15 years ago that the first really large-scale offshore wind farm happened, which was Hornsea One. But actually, the current record holder is another UK project. It's Walney Extension in the Irish Sea, completed a year or so ago. And what you see on the right-hand side there is this exponential growth in the Orsted portfolio. Currently, Hornsea One recently completed installation and commissioning of the turbines, and early next year will be fully operational as the world's largest offshore wind farm. So there's a transformation there in scale. There's a transformation of the challenges we're facing in terms of much further from shore, much bigger turbines, and different technologies, which we'll come back to in a minute. And then the other side of this, and actually the reason for that growth, is the transformation in what it costs. So what you see on the left-hand side there is the progression in recent years in the strike price won in competitive UK auctions for contracts for difference. So that's the contract which is government-backed and takes the offtake from UK offshore wind farms. And so it's been a remarkable transformation, remarkable reduction in the cost of energy from offshore wind farm, that means the cost which we as consumers end up paying for this power. And it's very striking. In the auction this summer, the winning prices were actually below the wholesale electricity price for the years in which those wind farms are due to start coming online. So we've made a massive transformation from offshore wind being almost a niche, coming at a cost premium, and being a special case, through to being very cost effective, available in very high volumes, transformational, and backed up now with a strong policy commitment, which will end up making this the backbone of our electricity system by 2030. And what's really remarkable is that we've moved from small sites, relatively easy conditions close to shore, through to challenging sites in much more challenging seas, way offshore, and yet this cost progression is being delivered. And on the right-hand side there you see some of what's made that possible. Some of it is economies of volume and scale. I think a big part of it is a maturing industry. The products that we're working with in terms of turbines and foundations and the transmission systems, those have all moved on enormously in this period. The companies that are doing it have matured enormously. They've made major investments, they've made major developments in their own skills, and it goes from innovating in the product through to innovating in everything that goes around that product and the processes that we do. So it also includes handling systems for big components. It also includes the vessels that we use for driving installation, and it also includes really pushing the boundaries for how you bring to shore and connect to the national grid the power that we're producing. At the same time, we've had a lot of synergies, and particularly on the two Hornsea projects. These are sister projects. They are adjacent offshore. They share the same transmission corridor, both onshore and offshore, and that's enabled us to take the experience that we've had building Hornsea One and transfer the lessons from that into Hornsea Two, and that's what enabled us to get down on Hornsea Two to the £57.50 per megawatt hour, which is the strike price which that project's producing for. And then the last one, and maybe the most important one, is risk reduction. And this is so important because offshore wind is a capital-intensive way of producing our electricity. And so one of the biggest levers that you can pull to try and reduce the cost of that electricity to society is to reduce the investor's perception of the risk involved. And so, that is a massive journey that we've been on, and the investment community is now not only comfortable with that risk, but also very eager to get into it. And actually, this perception of risk works all through the supply chain as well. As a developer and constructor, we need to have confidence that our supply chains will be able to reliably deliver for us. So that's a really important driver for us. And at the point when we get confidence in that reliability, we can assess our own project risk profile. And that enables us to be more ambitious, for example, in our construction timelines. It enables us to be more ambitious when we're going offshore and we're installing foundations and cables and turbines, in doing all of that in very quick succession. And of course that drives efficiency for us and in the end allows us to reduce the cost to the consumer. So that perception of risk that comes with a maturing industry has been extremely important. And this is where it's taken offshore wind. This is actually from early this year, so prior to the extraordinary results in the summer auction for CFDs. But what it shows is that, from 2012 to 2018, offshore wind electricity absolutely transformed not only the absolute cost of that electricity per megawatt hour, but also its relative position to the other production options that we as society can consider using. So we have become, and actually since this chart was produced, it's coming down even further. We have become that leading option, not just for the cost per megawatt hour, but for how deliverable it is within a predictable time period at big scale. So that's what's made the change. That's what's enabled us to make that decision to put offshore wind as the backbone of our system for 2030. So what does this look like in terms of things on the ground? This, by the way, is a view down from the nacelle of one of our Siemens Gamesa turbines at Hornsea, looking down at the deck from above of one of our SOVs on that wind farm. And you can see there the motion compensated gangway, which is the access mechanism for our people to get on and off the structure. So the UK is the world's largest market for offshore wind, and it's also our company's largest market for offshore wind. We've got 11 wind farms operating and producing in the country. You can see on the right-hand side where they're distributed. There's a cluster in the Irish Sea, there's a small cluster in the Thames Estuary, and there's a big cluster in the southern North Sea off the coast here. We've got 2 currently in construction, Hornsea One coming to the end of its construction, and Hornsea Two running roughly 2 years behind as the, if you like, the little big sister. And in driving this portfolio, we have been pioneering, if you like, both the UK market, the industry as a whole, the technologies involved. We've been the launch customer for the Siemens 6 megawatt direct drive platform. We've also been the launch customer for the MHI Vestas 8 megawatt turbine. And yeah, by 2022, this portfolio will be producing electricity equivalent to what the needs of 5.5 million UK homes consume over the year. So it is a big contributor. We've gone in this time from being not present in the UK as an energy company, being just a challenger, if you like, through to being, a proper player. That's the UK story, but actually the big news is that after this 25 years of development in this cluster around Northwest Europe, we're now at this springboard point where global markets are opening up at an amazing pace. For our company, we've got big important clusters in northern US, and we've got a big important cluster centered around Taiwan in Asia Pacific. And whereas the history in Northwest Europe was what I showed before, this building up from small, easy sites, taking technology from onshore wind and taking it offshore, all these new markets, of course, see what's been achieved in terms of cost of energy, speed of delivery, and they want that now, of course. So these new markets are starting really quickly at really big scale with massive ambition, and that's a brilliant opportunity, but it's also a really big challenge. You can see on the right-hand side some of what we have built up in Northwest Europe based on this 20 years of history. It includes 2,500 employees working in offshore wind in our company. It includes, that whole portfolio of assets running day in, day out, and it also includes a network of investment partners who've shared in those investments and share in those operating assets with us. So all of that we can expect to happen again as the spread goes globally. Some key facts about the two, Hornsea One and Hornsea Two. So you can see here where Hornsea One is, and you can see in the dark blue the area of the actual wind turbine array out there, 174 7 megawatt turbines out there. That gives us 1.2 gigawatts of total capacity, and that's enough with really great wind conditions out there to produce electricity equivalent to what well over 1 million homes will need. It's an amazing scale when you get out there, 400 square kilometres, and I can tell you from the top of the nacelle, looking out over the seascape, just seeing this beautiful array of gently turning turbines as far as the eye can see is something special. Of course, you can't see these from the shore. One of our biggest challenges is to get that electricity and connect it to the grid, and we've had to rethink how you do that and really push the boundaries in terms of developing high voltage AC transmission links which can bring that power to shore and connect it into the national grid. You can see at the bottom there some of the timeline that we've done this in. I'm going to race through this. Hornsea 2 you can see around the north and west of the Hornsea One site, and this is following, as I said, roughly 2 years behind. It's slightly bigger and will produce a decent amount of extra electricity compared with Hornsea One, and we connect into the same national grid substation at North Killingholme. And we are currently constructing that onshore, installing the export cables onshore, building the onshore substation, and we start going offshore back end of next year, and with a main offshore campaign in 2021 and completing in 2022. In doing all this, we have really done everything we can to try and build a healthy and competitive supply chain that can come with us on this massive growth journey and also come with us on the growth journey to come. A decent proportion of those supply chain, both in the development phase, in the construction phase, and in the operations phase, are all in the UK. We try and build collaborative partnerships. We've got more than 100 companies. You can see where they're distributed geographically there. And they're an amazing range of different companies, ranging from, if you like, brain power, consultancy companies, through to steel fabrication, through to manufacturing absolutely enormous turbine blades, and everything in between as well. So it's a remarkable range, and I think the distinguishing feature really is that they're companies who've been able to see an opportunity in this marketplace for them to get good business coming with us. And here's a very specific example that's very local. Our East Coast hub, located on the docks in Grimsby, where over these years, as we've added new projects, we've made new investments, building our facility. And you see at the bottom right there what it looks like now with a large facility and a workforce working out of that of 350 people or more. It's been transformational for that. It looks and feels extremely different there now. And that's an extremely local example of the sort of development that we're talking about. On top of that, we like to think that, we've actually become a local company here, from roots as a very, very much a Danish headquartered company, through to being really part of the business community here and playing our part in all sorts of different ways in that community. And very briefly, so on the left-hand side you see what it looks like in our future. We're aiming to have 30 gigawatts or more of renewable capacity by 2030. That's a tripling from where we are today. And on the right-hand side, you can see actually that's the UK's current plan, although there are some more ambitious plans than that, to have 30 gigawatts by 2030. And then on the right-hand, the far right, you can see perhaps the world expectation for offshore wind in that time period. And the point I want to make, 2 points really, that world opportunity is much bigger. So we've got a fantastic opportunity with the platform and the springboard of the UK growth, but actually the opportunity globally is even more exciting. But growth in itself is not worth chasing. We're talking about an extremely competitive marketplace now, and the only way it works is if you're going to grow and invest and be part of that. The only way it works is if you're also generating value, generating a return on your investment, and that's the steer that I would give to any business or enterprise, looking to get into it. So we're a world leader here in the UK. It's not often we can say that. We've got the world's largest wind farms being built here. We've built up over 2 decades and more a brilliant base of expertise, and we've been supported in that over multiple governments with relatively consistent policy decisions that have supported that growth. And that's now giving us a brilliant opportunity for services and products supplying into the new global market. So it's already happening. It's happening with steelwork. It's happening with blades. It's happening with expertise. Orsted coming with us as one of our suppliers on our journey, helping us deal with the tricky problems of unexploded ordnance in our wind farms all over the world. Transformative Technologies. Maybe just one to pick out there in the top left-hand side. Picked offshore a new technology which enables us in a much safer way to access these fixed structures offshore from moving boats. If you're bringing people onto a wind turbine, what this new technology does is enables in a motion compensated way to hoist directly from the deck of the vessel safely up into the turbine, and that is transformative. It takes away one of our most concerning ongoing safety risks moving from a moving boat onto the fixed structure. And the reason I like it is because as an example, is because it's disruptive technology. It's disruptive. It's brilliant for us. It enables us to simplify our foundation structure, to reduce the steel on it, to avoid having to incorporate a quite complex and difficult to build boat landing. It avoids our technicians having to start their day, doing a potentially tricky transfer from a moving deck, and it avoids them having to climb up perhaps 10, 20 meters of stairs. So it's great all round. It's much safer and quicker, and it's a great example of how the disruptive technologies will continue to change this industry. They're inevitable in this competitive arena where the cost of this electricity to society is the top focus, and the only way we can win these projects. The other examples there are all about what else you need to do if you make offshore wind the backbone of your electricity system. You need to deal with flexibility. You need to deal with some of the problems of heat and fuel as well, and also our waste. So I may have used up more of the time than I'd intended in terms of our questions. Apologies for that, Lord Haskins, but that was all I wanted to say. Thank you for listening.
Sort of tour de force. I mean, I suspect you can't get a more exciting business proposition in this country than what Duncan has just shown us there as to what's happening. I have a few questions, but I'd prefer to, I'm sure there are lots of questions available in the audience to ask Duncan, so can we start? There are already hands going up all over the place, which is great. In the middle here, where are the
So you talked about investment and the consortiums that you need to build to put these wind projects together. Could you give us a little bit more detail on that? And especially, what type of groups do you work with to build those consortiums, and what you see from the City of London in terms of investment, whether you see equity investment or debt finance, and how you structure that? That would be very useful.
Yeah, so I'll repeat the question. The question is about the financing consortiums, raising the money, and what we see in terms of debt and equity, particularly from London, in helping us do that. First thing I would say is in Orsted, we always make the original investment decision and commitment based on our balance sheet, and then typically at some point, either in construction or at the end of construction, we may invite in co-investors with us, and that allows us then to bring them in, recycle the capital, and that's what's enabled us to keep the growth and preserve our credit rating despite making these massive investments in assets. We've done that both with debt and equity. In Hornsea One, we put together a quite sophisticated package of 4 different types of debt, and we lined all of that up and brought in the equity on top. So we're now in a 50-50 joint venture that's on the equity side, and there's a very significant tranche of debt supporting that investment behind our investment partners. And this is now routine for us. So I would say this has just become normal business now, and we've got lots of different options of bringing people in construction, sharing construction risk, if they want that slightly racier risk-return profile, and we've got investors with us who want the less racy operational investment with us as well. And it's horses for courses, I think. And so there are other developers who are in a slightly different starting point, who wouldn't start assuming that they will invest off the balance sheet initially. And of course, in that circumstance, you need to put your consortium together earlier. And that's one of the, can be another challenge, especially when you're in the kind of regulatory regime where you've got to put a competitive bid together, and once you've won that bid, you're on a clock, and you've got to deliver your project and start construction and start producing power on a clock. So actually, in that circumstance, you've got to stitch your consortium together pre-bid. That comes with its own challenges.
Mr. Clark, I wonder whether you would turn back to slide 9 for me. One of the questions is the price you've put there for nuclear at 169 euros per megawatt hour. I'd like to challenge that. Actually, in France, it's around 30 or 40. They have some of the lowest priced electricity in the EU, if not the world, and they are 75% nuclear. Okay, so that figure there, I think you really need to look at. I think it's 4 times bigger than it needs to be. That's one thing. The other part is, what about storage? We recently had quite a large event in the UK, partially caused, I guess, by the wind farm or by a diesel genset. We don't know quite which tripped the other one up. What level of storage are you guys planning to put in the UK? Bearing in mind you've now got 5 gigawatts worth of installed power. How many hours worth of coverage are you planning to install for that 5 gigawatts of power?
So, starting with the nuclear point, we have Hinkley C in the UK that has got a 35-year contract for difference at more than £90 a megawatt hour. It's late. It continues to be questioned. The amount of public support going to that is enough to transform offshore wind in this country. There is just a massive, stark difference, and you can't look at historical investments in another country's nuclear fleet and what it produces for and sells for on a day-to-day basis now, many decades later, and compare that with these are lifetime costs of electricity for those technologies. So it's a very different proposition in the amount of public support needed, in the cost of electricity, in the time it can be delivered. On the second point, we are developing storage. The way the UK system works, accommodating different types of generation and accommodating the flexibility required to meet variable demand is the job of the system operator. They do that job. They do the balancing job in the shorter timelines, and actually to date we've got an extremely reliable system. The event you mentioned in August was the unfortunate consequence of about 5 extremely unusual things all happening together at the same time. And if any one of those 5 events had not happened, 2 of them were plants deloading as a result of a lightning strike causing a transmission line to flick out of service. But there were other events as well, and if any one of those events hadn't happened, then the overall event wouldn't have happened either, and the normal systems would have functioned as they normally do, and it was an event that happened for the first time in about 10 years. So I think overall it doesn't change the fact that we've got a very reliable system that works by and large all the time. But I accept what you're saying, that the transformation in terms of wind power on our system means a transformation in other parts of it as well. Storage, I think, will be a big part of that, and we're really working to be part of that as well. That's an opportunity.
How much have you installed actually in the UK storage-wise?
In the UK, we've installed 2 projects, 22 megawatts so far.
I had a question. Can you see any hands up? Very difficult to see from here. I have a question. The government involvement was very heavy originally with quite substantial subsidies, which have run right down. Lots of government people are saying around the government can now step back from offshore wind, that they don't have a role. The system that they have at the present time through the auction bid process seems to me to be anti-long-term investment, that you have to take every project on its own and that you cannot be guaranteed the next one. and every time we come. Is that system going to stay? Is the government involvement going to stay? Do you need them to stay?
I think government involvement does have to stay. I think the nature of what we do, really big infrastructure projects, that they don't happen in a vacuum. They always happen in someone's community, on someone's electricity system, and that means that the government, in lots of different guises, whether it be consenting, whether it be the rules and regulations that surround our electricity system, or whether it be that market mechanism like the CFD, I think they've got to be involved. Also the seabed leases through the Crown Estate. These are all inherently involving the authorities. I don't think you get away from that. But I do think that the market mechanism will evolve. We've had different market mechanisms. We had the renewable obligation, and that went through several different iterations with different numbers of certificates going to different renewable technologies. We moved through a transition phase into these CFDs, and I think we'll move to another transition. Well, the reason they're there is because when you've got infrastructure assets that need a very major upfront investment, but you have not got market price signals that can endure the lifetime of the assets, you need something to bridge that gap. Otherwise, you can't get the investment funds. So you need to bridge those things.
And government has to balance the different sources of energy too. It's the government at the end of the day has to work out which are, I mean, they will say they want everything, and then sort of there was a feeling, want everything, let it happen to the market. It can't be done like that. They have to plan. Nuclear is
there has to be a bit of design involved. There does have to be a bit of
is there enough
forethought and planning. I don't see that we've got a major problem today, but we need to evolve this, otherwise we could have a major problem when we get to 2030. It's going to look and feel very different then.
Yeah. Can I have a last question from somewhere?
Jackie Bell from Durham Energy Institute. Given what's been happening in this country for the last 3.5 years, what does a good deal look like to Orsted?
First mention of Brexit. Do you know, I feel extremely lucky that Brexit has fallen at this point in time between my two projects, Hornsea One and Hornsea Two. Hornsea One's just coming to end of construction. Hornsea Two, we're sort of at a very comfortable stage for any potential Brexit disruption. So I have to say, you know, I feel that we're pretty robust against it. I can see our maturing supply chains are also very robust about it. So, do you know, I'll be studiously non-political and say I think we're in good shape, whatever happens.
Thank you very much, Duncan. It is very interesting. These two great companies, Siemens Gamesa and Orsted, are tremendously important to the revival of the Humber estuary. Both foreign companies, both foreign investment, but both with huge commitments to the local communities, greater commitments to the local communities than many of their UK equivalents. And there's so many lessons I have learned from working with those two companies over the last few years about what modern corporate governance should be about. It is a privilege for us to have them working in this area. And I hope it continues. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.